Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, neurospicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things cycles, symbolism, and patterns.
And I'm Moonkittee, your queer femme, poly kitchen witch, and proud geek. Today's topic is queer basics, grounding and sacred space.
Okay, back to basics.
Yes, going back to our basic series, this is one of those things that it's really interesting because it could be talked about in the very beginning, but it's also something that you kind of go along because this is really truly a basic in that grounding and where you create sacred space is incredibly important to any sort of witchcraft that you may be practicing or any sort
Well,
of
and
magic
also,
practice that you may be practicing.
so many people talk about getting grounded or needing to become, centered, grounded, grounding, and yet you hear it all the time. But has anybody ever sat down and discussed it with you and taught you how to do it, or have you, how do you deep dive into that? Because you hear it all the time, like you're supposed to know what it is, but have you ever really looked into it? What is grounding?
Right.
What do they mean by grounding?
Well, for me, and what I tend to associate with a grounding is being connected to the earth underneath us. So it's really about how are you feeling? Because there have been moments, we've all had points where we have been in an energy space, whether you have gone dancing at a club or you've maybe taken some recreational things and having a little bit of fun, or you are high in a ritual because there's so much energy and you're so jazzed about something. Um, Sometimes we can kind of get floaty. Sometimes it can be a little floaty and everything. And what I mean with grounded, I mean connected to the earth. So you kind of have that feel of the weight of the earth beneath you and that kind of that foundation for where you're going to go with something. So to me, that's my first thought when it comes to being grounded.
Well, when you talk about being earthed or connected to earth, I always think the earth manifest in us is our body, our
Hmm.
physical form, our manifestation. And a lot of times, especially air signs, but everybody's guilty of this, is we get stuck in our heads. We will
Hmm.
intellectualize things instead of feel them. We will think over things instead of doing them. We will think about what to say instead of saying them,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. Or here's the other thing is I do also believe that our soul doesn't necessarily our spiritual energy doesn't stay tethered to the body at all times. I
Hmm.
think during certain meditation or dream states or even ritual working or yoga practices or whatever, there can be moments where it's like you park the body and let the soul fly free, let the spirit fly free.
Hmm.
So I think about grounding as coming back into your body, allowing your body to feel, checking in with, the fingers, the toes, the knees, the hips, the stomach. Am I hungry?
Hmm.
So a lot of that it can be grounding work. Like even just like after exercise, after dancing, then coming back and feeling your heartbeat because you got your heart rate up.
Hmm.
A lot of grounding for me is coming back into the body. I let my soul fly free, or my brain is just like blah 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 blah, just
Hmm.
working too hard, my intellect, and I have to bring it into the body. And sometimes you can't even address what you're feeling, what you're
Hmm.
emotionally feeling, if you can't listen to what your body's telling you. So,
Hmm.
in that sense, grounding becomes very important.
Hmm. And when I think of grounding, some people also think of centering yourself, but I think of grounding and centering as two slightly different things that they tie together. Grounding being finding yourself connected, and then centering is bringing yourself back into that connection.
Well, and I talk about into the now,
Mm-hmm.
into the moment, into your presence, into, centering to me is not just about, finding, the center
Mm-hmm.
of your, sense of self or whatever. But I also think of being in the now. We're
Mm-hmm.
no longer intellectualizing the future or the past. We're not, somewhere else. You ever look at someone and you're like, "What are you thinking? You're not even here. You're somewhere else. Tell
Oh,
me where you were."
I daydream all the time. I'd be in class and I would just zone out and space out. And it's like, okay, I'm grounded in some ways because I'm physically there, but I am so lost in another world that I'm not centered.
Yeah, so you're not here. So I
Hmm.
think coming to center, often I think about being aware of the presence of now, of the
Hmm.
power of now. We can worry about the future, we can be depressed about the past, but in the now, we can do something about what's in front of our face.
Hmm.
And I always think of that part that has something to do with grounding and centering,
Hmm.
is being aware of the hands that are right here in front of my face, the words that I'm currently saying and putting out into the world. I want to be present in the now and
Hmm.
in my body, but also just in this time and in this place.
So why is it important?
Well, as much as I love escaping the body and
Hmm.
going on adventures on a spiritual level or a psychonaut level or whatever. You always, I mean, we're here in this manifested life to, you know, soulmate's body
Hmm.
experience. So I think it's important that you come back to drive your meat suit.
Hmm.
You have to take, it has demands. It's like a really demanding car or horse. You have to like feed it and it doesn't do its functions as well if you're not back taking care of it, which
Hmm.
also comes back to listening to it because you want to make sure you're feeding it the high octane fuel and not
Hmm.
the stuff that your body's rejecting and making you feel crappy for. So I think it's just a part of, it's important. And also, you just don't want to be out there in the world not fully present all the
Hmm.
time. I mean, that
Right.
a lot of people do that and as an escape, but they end up messing their life up
Hmm.
a lot of the times if they're not willing to come in and be fully present.
Right. And it's sometimes when you are frazzled, flighty, or you're overwhelmed, disconnected, it's really easy, like you said, to escape. It's easy to escape
Yeah.
into something else. But again, like you said, we have to feed and water our meat suit that
Yeah.
we take care of. And if we're not taking care of the body in that moment, we all we're going to do is make the situation and everything worse eventually, progressively over
Mm-hmm.
time, to the point where it becomes less easy to take care of what we're doing because you could cause serious
Right.
damage if you're not taking care of the body that you are in. So it's escapism. It's great to escape out, but you have to come back and you have to feed all of those things, and that's why
Just like
grounding is important.
just like they say you can't pour from an empty cup.
Hmm.
It's making sure that you're refilling that cup, because what kind of magic and willpower are you exerting into the world if your cup is empty?
And that cup gets fueled by your personal energy. Anytime you're doing magic
Mm-hmm.
workings, you are pulling from your personal energy as well. You might be pulling from spiritual, extraplanar energy and everything combined into it, but there is always going to be an element of your personal energy that's tied into it, whether even if it's just you're the binding or the vessel, you're still using your personal life force that goes into it. So in order to replenish that, you need to take that
Come
nourishment
back.
and come back into
Yep.
yourself.
Yep, exactly. So it's basically considered probably a very healthy way to operate through life would
Hmm.
be to come back and make sure that you ground.
Hmm.
Yeah, because we just don't want to go through life completely flighty and frazzled, only slightly. I mean, because that's just
Yeah.
part of my nature, but
Right.
I have to combat it somehow.
Right. I often will have my mind in a different time or place just because I tend to overthink things and I will zone out. And like I said, I will just zone out and just think, and my mind will be a million miles away.
And then it's like, where did the time go?
Yeah. So I'm like, crap, where did the
Yeah.
time go? I've doom scrolled for an hour. I've lost all of this kind of thing. Okay, now it's time for me to get back into myself. It's time to take a sip of water. It's time to go grab a snack, use the restroom, all of those things to attend to those needs to remind myself that it's for wherever you are and whatever you're overthinking and everything else, that is
Yeah.
a not a true reflection of the whole.
So then, what advice do you give people if they're trying to figure out how to ground themselves? What do you like to do for grounding?
It's really interesting because grounding is one of those things that can be done so many different ways.
Yes.
And in different circumstances. So one of my favorite things to do when I am just feeling overwhelmed by the world outside is to just go out and is I like to bare feet on the ground.
Yeah.
So I
You're
will
like
step
not in the
out.
snow,
I'm not gonna do it in the
but
snow. I'm not gonna do it in the mud. I'm not gonna do it in the water. But
I'll
if
do it
I
in the
have the
water.
ability, it's dry, it's warm. I will bare feet in the grass. And then
Oh,
just sit down
I love bare
or
feet in the edge of the lake or the edge of the
Mhm.
ocean, and feet
Yeah.
in the sand. Yeah, I love, like you said, in the right circumstances where I'm not going to get, frostbite. I
hmm
love getting bare feet on ground.
hmm
But the other thing is, I will hug a tree, and I've literally taught my kids to do the same thing. Like, you need to get some of that frazzledness out. Just go hug a tree, thank them for,
hmm
purifying our breathing air and for the symbiotic relationship that we have with them. But like just, appreciating a tree is
hmm
it's actually it's a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. So I am a tree hugger
hmm
and
I
shameless about it.
I don't hug, but I will touch. I will oftentimes find myself reaching out and touching a tree, and
They
just
say touch
or
earth, right?
yeah, touch
Touch
earth, touch
earth,
a
a
tree,
rock.
and just kind of look at patterns and bark, something to kind of recenter
Right.
my focus into something else. I'll also often will hold rocks or crystals
Yep.
in my hand again, just kind of like, okay, hey, this is something that comes out of the earth. Let's pull the energy back into this. Um,
And if not in my hand, sometimes in my bra.
right.
But it's still a good place to keep some rocks
hmm
sometimes. Just
Yep.
some little stones,
I,
no
I
big
will I
deal.
will use that as a pocket for other things. Just rocks tend to be pointy. So,
But yeah, just being out in nature
hmm
in general, I found very grounding. I like to pay attention, focus your attention onto the wind, the temperature, the smells. Being grounded or in your body is being aware of your senses.
hmm
The sounds that you hear, the things that come alive just by you
hmm
witnessing them, whether it's the state of the seasons and the plant growth around you or wildlife. So being outdoors is like so incredibly grounding for me. Like when
hmm
I'm overwhelmed by crowds of people and all of their energy in certain situations, like, when you're inside buildings and, at big events or festivals, getting outside, going outside and getting fresh air and just becoming aware of my senses in nature and what I can observe, that can be very grounding for me.
hmm for me, as I am incredibly touch centric, for me, hugging or touching a person that I know and I trust is also a really great way to get me grounded. If I'm incredibly emotionally upset or sad, oftentimes just putting my arms around like my partner's body and just holding them for a moment will ground me. I also do this a lot for other people. I tend, again, because of the nature of who I am, I tend to be very touch centric. So oftentimes my hugs go a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Or I will just come up and I will loop my arm around someone and just pull and be not only be a connection for them, but also let them be a connection for me, depending on the circumstances of
Hmm.
that. I know we had a mutual friend when we were going to the advanced conferences, the Pantheacons and things like that, where there would be heavy ritual energy, and there almost was always at least one or two friends saying, "Hey, I'm going to be a designated ground. I'm going to make sure that I stay outside of it, so that way when you come down from a ritual, you have someone that you can go to and just hold and shunt off all that extra energy from it." But I will do that just without magical practices. If I'm just emotionally overwhelmed or I'm having a frustrated day at work or something
Hmm.
like that, anything like that, oftentimes I'll just like go to my partner, wrap my arms around them, and just hold there and breathe for a moment.
Not only is that very grounding, but it actually releases what like oxytocin,
hmm
serotonin, all of those really good feel, dopamine, good feel chemistry in our brains.
hmm
And they say like we really need like a regular amount of hugs.
hmm
Human touch is important. And so being able to have people in your life that you trust that can just come over and hold me while I
Exactly.
cry
And
or
it,
scream.
right, in a non-sexual,
No strings
no strings
attached.
attached way.
Yeah, right, exactly. And platonic, that's what we mean.
Yeah.
In a platonic healing way. Even the reason there's careers in massage therapy is because people need touch.
hmm
Reiki healing, it's kind of more energetic based, and it's not something I personally get into. But again, it's about like helping with an energy exchange and a connection between
Mm-hmm.
humans. So yeah, there's definitely uh, getting others involved is can be very grounding
Mm-hmm.
as long as it's a trusted source and you're getting consent. Those are
Mm-hmm.
very important. Eating food, we talked
Mm-hmm.
about checking in with your body and figuring out what it needs, but
Mm-hmm.
eating food can be very grounding. It's often why we want to take a nap. We call it a food coma.
Mm-hmm.
And, that can be very grounding. So when you're find out like nuts tend to be very
Mm-hmm.
earthy, very grounding, but also chocolate, which I
Mm-hmm.
think technically kind of comes out of a nut. But
Yep, kind of
um,
love or hate as she got that bright, as sometimes chocolate can be grounding.
it could, yep.
It can definitely
Yeah,
help bring you back
very
in.
earthy
Mm-hmm.
type foods. Like I love fruits, so fruit can
Mm-hmm.
be very grounding for me. Again, also with that consciousness of like thanking Mother Nature for providing this nourishing
Mm-hmm.
food and letting my body get the energy that it needs too, so it can keep functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, eating can be very grounding.
And the last thing I tend to do is, depending on what it is, I will find a small different kind of routine or ritual itself. So, for example, these don't have to be elaborate. This is making a cup of tea.
Right.
That
Can be
ritual
very grounding.
of pouring of putting the water in the pot. I have an electric kettle, so turning that on, getting out, going through my teas because I tend to have a lot of teas and have a lot of loose leaf teas. So that ritual of picking out the tea that I want, putting it in the strainer, putting it in the cup, getting my cup centered, and getting all that preparation. It's those little steps that become its
Hmm.
own kind of routine and ritual. And that also is a very grounding thing, as well as sitting there with that warm beverage, taking it in and just letting it kind of soothe me from the inside out.
Right? Yeah. Some of us can be very comforted by ritual and
Mm-hmm.
routine, by I do this every morning, or, this
Mm-hmm.
is how I wind down at night, and having
Mm-hmm.
that familiarity and, the same thing in the same order on a consistent level can be very grounding, can be
Mm-hmm.
very centering, can be very, yeah, very powerful. So
Mm-hmm.
then, so that's grounding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's other things that people can do for grounding, and I'd love to hear what other people, what their go-to, like recognizing that you need
Mm-hmm.
to, and what is it that you can do, and what's your go-to. But then kind of connected, kind of not. We also want to talk about sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
How is sacred space connected with grounding?
It sounds like at first that it's not, but follow us on this tangent here for a little bit. So sacred space is that an intentional space to honor or conduct magical work, or to
Mm.
again honor a deity, to do some sort of
Or spiritual.
honorific spiritual kind of thing.
Yeah.
It is, pardon me, an intentional space. So you're creating that, whether it's the size of an altar, whether it's the size of a ritual, whatever it may be, it's an intentional space that you are creating.
And
It
space
can,
being place, but also time.
right. And it can be temporary or it can be permanent, depending on the nature of what you're going to do. So a temporary might be a gathering of witchy friends out in nature somewhere, and you go in there, you do something, and then you leave the ground afterwards. A permanent space could be something like a church is a permanent sacred space, or an altar or a room dedicated to that kind of thing. But in either way, they're both, that kind of sacred space is a protective measure. It's a protective measure to focus the energies of what you're doing in on an entity, whether again you're focusing an altar towards a deity, or you're focusing a ritual towards energy raising or something else. It's a protective measure. So because of that need for protection, you're going to have this kind of need to have that protective nature grounded in something. So it's going to need to be either grounded in earth, grounded in someone, grounded in a location, whatever that may be. All those kinds of things tie back together with that need for a grounded base to be able to hold the limits and the confines of what that space is going to be.
Well, and like for example, when you're doing a magical working, you don't want your mind wandering off
Hmm.
elsewhere about thinking about like work and school and all these other things that happened last week or next month. You sacred space again is about having a place or a time set aside, and you can bless that space and time, and you can invoke that groundedness of presence that we were talking
Hmm.
about earlier. And you can bless it, and you can have like set up that protection, and know that in this bubble, in this space and time, I can exert my energy and my willpower to this working because we have asked for this place to be safe and blessed
Hmm.
and sacred. So, and there's like you said, there's some places that are just like permanently considered sacred, not just churches and other holy buildings, but also like cemeteries. I think
Hmm.
about it's hallowed ground, it's sacred space. You go into it with reverence. It can be, a special spot like near a waterfall or out in the woods, something special to you that can become sacred space because you move into it with reverence and you are safe, you feel safe there to do magical working. What do we do to set up sacred space?
That'll depend. Like
Right.
everything,
I
because
mean,
again, no magic practice is exactly the same. No meditation practice is exactly the same. No energy practice. And again, I'm using those all words kind of interchangeably because you may not identify as a magical practice, but you may identify as a wellness practice or a mindfulness practice, and it's all kind of the similar. We're talking about the same thing with different names.
mhm,
Basically, when it comes to it, there's a number of different things you can do. A lot of which is just making sure, like you said, set a space and time. So
mhm.
know what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. So that way you are dedicating the time and energy that you're going to need to conduct whatever it is that you're going to do. And then cleansing the area, making sure that
Right.
whatever negative energy that may be existing there has finds its way out so you can conduct whatever you're going to do in a place that comes from an energetically favorable point
Right. And,
place.
sometimes people will cast like a protective circle of energy.
Hmm.
And when you cleanse that area energetically, it's intended so that your energy that you're creating for your intention, for your working, it doesn't go awry or get
Hmm.
used for other purposes or have other energies attached to it so that you can keep it. Quick examples of ways that you can cleanse energetically a space would be like, burning a smudge stick of some kind.
Hmm.
Again without culturally appropriating ones, but
Hmm.
uh,
Florida water.
something me and Florida water. I love me some Florida water. That's it. Because I'm a water person. So,
Hmm.
like, some people like to burn things and I like to spray them instead. But, there's a reason that holy water is a thing in the,
Hmm.
and incense.
Hmm.
Incense is another one, so how those items of spiritual tools span multiple cultures and multiple spiritual traditions is
Hmm.
because they energetically cleanse the space. You could set up rocks on your altar
Hmm.
that can also be the intention being about cleansing the energy
Hmm.
around your space, around your sacred space.
Hmm.
So once you get the energy cleansed, what we set the intention, we kind of, can
Hmm.
cast a circle, perhaps.
Right. However, you're choosing to cleanse your space or set up your protective measures of what it's going to be, and then you're making time to do what you're doing, but also again coming out of that once you've done whatever ritual or work that you're working on the process of doing it, this comes back to grounding in making sure that you release that energy of the thing that you are
Mm-hmm.
working on and come back into yourself. So making
Yep.
sure that as you're setting the time and setting your sacred space, which includes that time and place for a ritual, you're also making sure you're setting time to break down,
Yeah.
to
To
come
come
back into your
back,
body, to clean up,
to
to
wrap
do
it
all
up.
of those things to bring yourself back into the present.
So a lot of times when I was involved in community ritual work, after raising energy and with our intention and releasing the working for whatever it was into the world, we would have a feast where we would do toasts and eating sacred food that was blessed,
Hmm.
ritual food. But yes, and that would be the intention of that would be we did this massive working. We very much focused on energy and release, build up and release, and now we're going to come back to our bodies and come back to talking amongst ourselves and cheering
Hmm.
toasts for the deities that came in and the energies that came to help us. But yes, very much imbibing food and liquid to help
Hmm.
us come back to being embodied instead of
Exactly.
just working the spirit.
Ultimately, what it comes down to is we're talking about that connection of the spiritual workings to the mundane workings of our body and how those things tie together. And that ultimately, to me, is the core of grounding and centering,
Yep.
because you're doing both. Like
It's
everything
the
else,
sacred
it's the sacred, it's the
sacred
foundation.
bridge. Yeah, sacred bridge between the spiritual and mundane. Like we can ascend the bridge and we can descend the bridge, but the bridge has to be there.
Hmm. Or you end up making a different one, but that's a whole other story.
Then it
Build
gets
bridges.
complicated. Little bridges. Yes, but it's keeping that connection of what is sacred and, what is mundane, and also once again having the now, getting into the power of right now. What's in front of your face? What can I do? What energy do I have and what can I do with it? And then how can I come back to um life as we
Hmm.
know it?
Find the magic of the moment.
Exactly. And make sure that you don't lose yourself somewhere along the way.
Yes.
Well, I think that that kind of wraps up grounding in sacred space, but obviously we love to hear what other people do for grounding,
Hmm.
for setting their sacred space. Is it permanent? Is it temporary? Do you take it with you? Um, do you have something at your home that you set up and visit regularly, or sacred space happens when this group of people gather with the intention? How
Hmm.
do you manifest your sacred space, and what do you do to stay grounded or to come back to yourself? And with that, I just want to say thanks for listening to the Queer Witch Project. And give us those thumbs up and those stars if you like what you hear. Make sure you're following us and getting some notifications so you can come back and visit us again.
Sounds great. And if there's a topic you want to know more about or an episode topic you'd like to suggest, contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle at Queer Witch Project. We upload every other week. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously.
Bye.
Bye.